So I want to talk to you guys about Singin' Dog Double Reads. Singin' Dog Double Reads is an online double read shop and one of the largest suppliers of high quality and affordable professional and student reads for oboe and bassoon in the USA. Visit them at www.singindog.com to see all of their products, and you'll be glad you did. That's Singin' Dog Double Reads.
Hey, let's talk about Jenna Ingalls Reads. She has built her business on providing high-quality handmade reeds, education, and a sympathetic ear to oboists across the country. When you order from Jenna Ingalls Reads, you get prompt communication, reeds, or cane handcrafted to your specifications, and cheerful, friendly customer service. All orders are mailed within 1 week, sometimes much faster. Single orders or monthly read subscriptions are welcome, and she'll work with you to find the combination of response, resistance, stability, and flexibility that is right for you. Podcast listeners can use the code DISH, all caps, for 10% off their first order at JennettIngle.com. That's JennettIngle.com. Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Read Dish,
a podcast for oboists,
bassoonists,
and the people who love them.
Galit, I'm back.
Oh, thank God. I have been going to text you every single day while you were gone. And then I was like, oh, don't text her. She's not here. She doesn't want to text you.
Well, and it feels like forever since we've done this because, not to peek behind the curtain, but we pre-recorded episodes for when I was going to be gone. So we didn't, not release on time. So it really feels like a minute since we have recorded a dish.
A very long minute. I was like, oh my God, this hilarious thing happened. I got a text. Oh. Tell me about your trip.
It was amazing. Of course, the centerpiece, the whole point of going was going to La Scala, going to Aida. And it was this really surreal moment. There were times that I looked around and I was just like, I'm here. I'm doing it. I've dreamed of this moment. I don't know. It was so insane. The singing was crazy. Okay, so you walk in and there are all these larger than life statues of these pinnacles of Italian composition. So Verdi and Rossini and Donizetti, and I was so mad. Everyone broke the cell phone rule. I was like, was I reading an old part of the website? Have you guys just decided it's an uphill battle and you're not doing the cell phone rule anymore? So I didn't get a picture of me standing, embarrassingly proud and giddy in front of this huge Verdi statue. No. But it was okay because it kept us, completely in the moment. Uh-huh. But the singing was so amazing. It was Aida. And we studied a lot before going to see it. And apparently the opera was really criticized in its time because it was too much like French grand opera. And of course, they want Verdi to be capital I Italian. But what that means is there are all those huge grand opera elements. There was huge sphinx heads, and some of the cast members were painted blue all over their bodies, and they were carrying out the women on these beds with 4 men on each post and fanning. And it was just the pageantry and the drama. It was so insane. The singing was phenomenal. We literally stopped counting at 20 curtain calls at the end. Literally. There were people getting up and leaving because the curtain calls were taking so long. And we were like, oh man, why are you getting up and leaving? This is like the Super Bowl of opera, man. Little do we know, they were leaving because there are taxis lined up outside La Scala waiting for the opera patrons to leave. And when they're gone, they're gone.
Really?
So, side note, we were all gussied up in our fancy opera garb. going down from our hotel room down to the lobby to have them help us call a cab. And a couple floors down, a woman steps in, also very dressed up, and she hears us speaking English, and she goes, "Oh, are you going to the opera tonight?" Another American. And we were like, yes. And we started talking about how excited we were to go to the opera. And she says, "Oh, sorry to have to chat. I got to go run down to the ATM to get money for my cab." And I said, "Oh, no, no, no. Let's just share a cab." And she goes, "Really?" I was kind of nervous about taking a cab by myself, foreign country. And I was like, "Yes, of course. Let's share a cab."
I do not like where this is going.
Oh, man. It was fine. And then I said, "And you know what? Why don't we catch a cab on the ride back too?" And she said, "Oh, that would be wonderful." So the opera gets over. Everyone is like booking it out.
Uh-huh.
And we knew where she was sitting. And so we went there. She wasn't there. And for the opera house being huge, there aren't that many gathering areas. So we were like, okay, she's not here. She's not here. We check outside. She's not there. We go back inside. And the person's like, "The opera house is empty, ma'am. You can't come back in." So by the time we realized that she had ditched us in our commitment to not ditching her, every cab was gone.
Great.
So we waited a couple minutes. They were not coming.
No.
And so here we are in Milan in the nicest clothes that we have worn in a decade. I'm in heels, and we figure out that we have to walk back to our hotel.
How far was it?
It was only about a mile, but it's
In heels?
in heels, and it was at night, and we were dressed really fancy. And so we were trying to walk really fast, and my feet were just killing me. And so at one point,
I'm laughing and also crying for
oh my
you
gosh,
at the same time.
I decide I have to take them off. I was just like, I
have to take
can't
'em off.
stand it anymore. And so I walk the rest of the way. It's like, this is supposed to be the fanciest moment of my life. And I am walking in stocking feet on the streets of Milan. And it occurred to me, do you remember the episode of Jersey Shore when they're in Italy?
No, I don't know the episode of Jersey Shore when they're in Italy.
And they go out to the club, and Snooki fights with her boyfriend,
No.
and he like storms out of the club. And so JWoww is like trying to chase after him to track him down to get him to come back and talk to her, but he's going super fast because he's in sneakers and she's in high heels. And then she's like, Gianni, wait. And so she takes off her heels and she's like, "I'm barefoot on the streets of Florence." And I was like, okay, I'm just living my JWoww fantasy here on my vacation. But it all worked out, and then we spent the rest of the vacation committed to eating and purchasing and drinking wine, and it was great. But I can honestly say that I went to 2 different foreign countries, in some cases small towns where very little English was spoken, and the rudest person to me the entire time was a fellow American. So there you go. Thanks so much.
Yay, America.
What have you been up to?
Well, not nearly as much as you, obviously, but good stuff. We moved to a new house, which I really like.
Yay.
And I got to play this really awesome gig with the Mississippi Symphony where I didn't know this, but apparently Jackson, Mississippi is like the U.S. home of the International Ballet Competition. They do it once every 4 years in Jackson. And so I got to play principal oboe, and the Joffrey Ballet was performing. And I got to play for the Joffrey Ballet. It was so cool.
That's amazing.
It was so cool. It was just, I had this big solo. It was the Cacciatorian Adagio from Spartacus, which I hadn't known before, but apparently it's big in the dance community.
Okay.
And it was this giant solo, and it was the first time that they had ever tried to do it with live music. And I was like, I'm an integral part of this production. Oboists, we love being the center of attention, and we love feeling important. And it just checked all those boxes for me.
Okay.
But yeah, it's been a really good summer. I got contacts, so I feel much more comfortable in the Mississippi humidity. This was key. This was almost as big as finally getting prescription sunglasses, to be honest with you.
So you can finally be rid of that nose bridge glasses sweat.
You know that struggle, and you know that it's real.
We've also got some big podcast news.
So exciting. Okay, so by the time this episode is released, we will have launched our very first merch store on the website.
I'm so excited.
We have 2 items right now. These are limited release. We have a tote bag with this really awesome design on it, and we have a shot glass that is good for oboes and bassoons, and the shot glass says, "All you read is love."
Hopefully getting some of that good juju into
We got to
your
get
reads.
that good juju. And Jackie, do you want to tell them what the design is on the bag?
Well, this design was very hard earned.
Yeah.
We should specify. So that we had this idea. We have several ideas, actually. If this turns out well, hopefully more to come. But we wanted something that would work for any member of the double reed community. So we have all 4 main members of the double reed family: oboe, English horn, bassoon, contrabassoon, and it says squad underneath. So you can, tell everyone who you're running with when you're toting around your sheet music and your reed tools and whatnot. But the design came, or the idea for the design, I should say, came before the actual design, and neither you nor I can draw or graphic hoobajub.
Actually, it was really funny because you were like, well, what do you envision? And then I was just drawing like stick figure oboes. And you're like, no.
So we had to enlist some help. And we found some resources with which to order some designs. And the first artist we worked with, now, Double Reed Dish is very committed. We do not throw shade. But as we would say in the South, bless their heart.
Bless them.
So the intersection of graphic designer who also is familiar with the Double Reed family, we weren't so secure about, and so we sent a description of what we wanted and multiple pictures of different angles and scales of every single one of the instruments. And this first person had a vendetta against the English horn. I don't know.
Oh my God. So first, the English horn was a clarinet. They sent back the design, and I was like, why is there a clarinet in here?
And so we said, that is a clarinet.
If you could make it an English horn, and then I attached 2 more pictures of English horn. And then we get the revision, and it looks like an English horn on the bottom, but the reed is an oboe reed on the top. And so I was like, oh, okay. So we request that the bocal be put on the top of the horn. And they literally drew a bocal on top of the oboe reed, like above it. So it looked like bocal, reed, English horn.
Top to bottom.
It was terrible.
So we do not tell this story to throw shade, but merely...
It was just really funny.
It was so funny, and we needed to go with a different artist who, could more adequately execute our vision, because we were not going to, rest until we got an awesome product that everyone can be really excited about.
And we're so excited. And we found this other person whose style we liked, and we got the design back first try. It was so amazing. I couldn't stop staring at it. It was just so cute. It's so cute, and I love it so much, and I think you guys are going to love it too.
It's perfect. It's light. It's a unique aesthetic. And we should also say, this isn't to line our pockets and make bank. This is really to create more resources. Well, first, we want you guys to have these awesome products to unite us as a community. But also, with more resources comes our ability to do more things and reach more people with the podcast. So this is going back to the Double Reed community and to Double Reed Dish. So yeah, we appreciate your support, and hopefully you guys like all this Swag.
Yeah, and it goes into these really great future projects that we're brainstorming to provide more opportunities and resources for our community. So it's all going to a good place. So, go to our shop.
Today's episode is brought to you in part by Double or Nothing Reeds. You know them. They're the company that's dedicated to providing excellent handmade oboe and bassoon reeds to discriminating double reed players of all ages and abilities. And good news, Double or Nothing Reeds has recently expanded to sell double reed tools and supplies, gift items, and more. This includes knives, knife blades, thread, staples, cane, bags, and resources for students. Better yet, as authorized Fox and Yamaha dealers, they offer an extensive range of oboes and bassoons for all levels. Additionally, they sell quality used instruments on consignment. And if you're looking for private oboe lessons and can't find anyone nearby, Double or Nothing Reeds offers oboe lessons via Skype. Visit their website, doubleornothingreeds.com, for good quality and affordable reed making supplies and resources, lessons, instruments, and much more.
Everyone knows that Genda Industries is known for their reed knives, sharpening, and overall amazing quality and service in the double reed world. But there is so much more going on at Genda Industries. Did you know you can get oboe and bassoon reeds from Genda Industries Artisan Mall? The Genda Industries Artisan Mall is like a farmer's market filled with talented local and regional reed makers selling their reeds. It's a great way to try out some new reeds from new makers. Who knows, one day they may be your reeds for sale. Add the code DRDGenda, all caps, no spaces, at checkout and get 10% off any Genda reed knife, maintenance kit, reed knife sharpening book, cutting block, and reed tool roll. Visit them at www.gendaindustries.com. Oh, and they're more than just reed knives.
Welcome to the podcast, Bill Ludwig, professor of bassoon at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Welcome, Bill.
Hello. Thank you very much.
I always like to start by asking if you can introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us about your training and educational journey, maybe how you got to the bassoon in the first place.
Sure. Well, starting back at the beginning, I was a saxophonist in high school and a devoted jazzer, and that's where my life was headed. And then my band director in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, decided bassoon would be a good double, so I thought that was great and started getting lessons with my first teacher, John Patterson, who was the bassoon professor at Louisiana State. And he was just a wonderful teacher and inspiration in a lot of ways. And so that's how I got my start. I was so excited to be a jazzer and have a bassoon double that I went to, I think it was called North Texas State at that point. It was a big jazz school, and I did pretty well in the jazz program in terms of getting into a big band and all that. But I noticed around me there was like 40 other saxophone players that I could sight read better, but sure played better jazz than I did. And so I decided, well, maybe bassoon would be a better fit. So then I stayed there, actually transferred back to LSU to study with Mr. Patterson, and got my undergraduate degree at LSU with him. And during the summer, I think it was before my senior year, I was able to get to the Sarasota Music Festival was already going way back then. And also the Aspen Music Festival. So I had a lot of interesting, particularly that summer, got to see the larger world of the bassoon world with Saul Schoenbach and Sherman Walt at the Sarasota Festival, and with Leonard Sciarro at Aspen, spent time studying with him. So it was a really important summer for me. And then got into, after the undergraduate at LSU, went to Temple University to study with Bernard Garfield. Very enlightening process there. The school at that time was maybe not up to what I was hoping for in terms of a graduate program, but certainly Mr. Garfield was a wonderful teacher, and the ideas of expectations and what the level of playing needs to be successful was really something I got from him. But my wife and I decided to get married after that first year of grad school, and so we both got into Yale to Yale University, and so I finished my master's at Yale University with Arthur Weisberg. So that's kind of the educational process that I went through, and I immediately got a job at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, right out of grad school, and played in the Kansas City Orchestra quite a bit during that time period, and then was lured to go to University of South Florida, where there was a active quintet, and that was doing a recording project with Musical Heritage Society, if anybody knows what that group is anymore. But of the Rica quintets, and stayed there for 8 or 9 years, and then went to LSU to replace Mr. Patterson. My parents were living in Baton Rouge, so that was a nice homecoming for us. And we lived at LSU lived in Baton Rouge and taught at LSU for many years. And then 2007, I believe, I decided to make a change and came to IU. So here we are.
Whenever we have someone on who studied with some of these legacy teachers, as we think of them, I've bassoon grown up hearing those words, Leonard Sharrow, Sherman Walt, Bernard Garfield. Could you talk to us about your experiences with some of those teachers?
Well, sure. From each of those, my main teacher, like I've said, is John Patterson at LSU, and he had studied with Schoenbach to a certain degree, and he was also a very brilliant person, acoustically very, very knowledgeable, and he was also a terrific repairman. And so I got a lot of just sort of practical insights from him, and as well as he had a just beautiful sound. So for Mr. Patterson, it was mostly I was learning mostly through his sound that he was producing, and his ideas about the acoustics of the instrument and the reed, etc. But with kind of my first branching out with that was with Mr. Schoenbach, and it was Schoenbach had very set approaches, shall we say, to teaching the instrument, and I think he felt I was somewhat untrained from a phrasing standpoint, and particularly from the tableau approach in the conception of phrasing. So I spent a summer with him. After I saw him at Sarasota, I spent the next summer in Marlboro. I wasn't at Marlboro, but I found a place to get a job at Marlboro, and spent 6 or 7 weeks studying with him while he was at Marlboro. And it was a very, very eye-opening, just trying to get into phrasing ideas, getting the concepts of larger phrasing and all those details that I think he was very good at. So for Saul, it was very intimidating. Honestly, I think many people thought Saul was intimidating. I had friends that had studied with him, and it was kind of tear you down and build you up and build you back up in his image. But it really wasn't that to a large degree. It was just kind of reality, I think, for Mr. Schoenbach. Well, here's where you got to get to, Bill. And, he didn't spare the words to be overly, sympathetic to where you are in your career. But it was very eye-opening, and it was a very important summer for me, particularly that summer at Marlboro. With Mr. Sharrow, he was such a legacy even then in my eyes. He was one of the first recordings I'd ever heard on the so Coronet records of the Etler Sonata and some of these other things. And so it was just a pleasure to sit next to him and listen to what he had to say. We went through basics, a lot of the built concert studies, and I don't remember what else, but major literature. And there was always such musicality associated with what he was trying to get across to me. So but for me, a lot of it was listening to these people play, and I think that's what I try to get my students to realize when they go study with other people besides me. Well, what did he do with his embouchure? How did he sound? Well, how did he make that soft attack? Listening and looking at the individual. So for some reason, I did a lot of looking at performers when they played, and I assumed that when they moved an embouchure or they moved this, it was purposeful. But sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I learned a lot through that process as well. And then studying with Mr. Garfield, like I was maybe alluding to a little bit beforehand, it was, okay, dude, this is the real time here in terms of being in the Philadelphia Orchestra and showing up every week and, having those kind of standards. And so It was, and he was focused on his read style. I learned a huge amount from Mr. Garfield. He was rather focused on his read style, and just kind of for the first 6 weeks, for the first semester, I should say, we just kind of looked at his read in the light and says, I think you ought to be playing something a little bit more like this. And I had something, like massively bigger than that. So I just went back and tried, and I was getting close, but I think my embouchure is just a little bit too big, and I think I had a Fox at that time. It was a very early Fox, shall we say. And I just don't think his read style, I wasn't aware of it, but I just don't think his read style could bring that kind of, stuffy, Fox instrument to life. So after about the first semester, he said, I think you're better off with that read style you had earlier. And in some way it was a relief for me, but it's also, I was really kind of learning just by trial and error at that point, I think, with reed making. But that was trying to get that softer style of work and learning about different parts of the reed, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that was really a small element, like I want to reinforce with Mr. Garfield. It was just, freedom. We did Tonsman. I can remember some Vivaldi, and he would just show me, I think you ought to change this articulation. Don't you see this relationship here with this, particularly like the Tonsman Sonatine first movement? There were some articulations he thought didn't make sense, and as I look back on it now, I agree totally, and just to make the phrasing work out. So the sensibility of, hey, you're a professional, you make decisions about music, and let's decide from a intelligent, thoughtful process what you want to do with this music, and it's not just articulations, I'm trying to say. And then with Mr. Weisberg, that was another kind of intimidating experience, because I'm not sure how much he really practiced. He practiced a lot when he was a kid, and he was this genius of a musician and a bassoonist and a composer to a large degree, but certainly a genius as a conductor of contemporary music. He would say, I'll be struggling with this and this little section. Well, let me just try that. He would grab my horn, put it on his, he wouldn't even put a seat strap on. He would just kind of hold it against his leg and just plow through something that was just taking me, a month to get to half tempo, or at least I felt that way. And so that made me I really reevaluated my whole approach when I went with Mr. Weisberg, not particularly because he said, Bill, you got to start over, but I felt I saw so many fundamental things that I still was not sure of. And so that made me reevaluate how I took a breath and what my embouchure was like, and what, just all the basics. And then how do you practice, and why are you grabbing the horn like it's, 400 pounds of something you're trying to hold up, and just reevaluate my posture. And a lot of it is still ongoing today, that evaluation, reflection on what is successful, etc. But he was, and I loved him very much. He wasn't an overly talkative person, just as my first teacher wasn't an overly talkative person. But he said, "Well, that's pretty good." So I would go out of the lesson thinking, I had just conquered the universe with that kind of praise. So, but from that, but again, I think we had talked about, some issues of confidence, or maybe, you think you're fooling somebody, but he made me get to the point of realizing that, you got to spend this work on these basic ideas and apply those basic ideas, and how to get those turned into effectively musical gesture. So I still owe a great deal of debt to all of those people.
So you have been an artist, teacher, faculty at the Brevard Music Center since 2002. And I am a very happy alum of the Brevard Music Center from, I think, 2011, something like that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on music festivals in general and why they're important for students. I know that for me, it was a very formative and positive experience. And I know some students struggle with, I could audition for festivals, or I could work and make money for the school year. So could you talk to us about, why that kind of experience is important
Sure. And I agree totally with you. And I think, as time has passed, I think our economic situation, it grows more dire to a certain degree in terms of higher education and how the students can fund it and how they, so oftentimes there's some real necessity of students working over the summer. But I encourage every one of my students to find some summer process for them, some summer outlet, because I really felt like I was aware of those those summer festivals when I was a student. Of course, this was a long time ago, and there's a much different layer of them now. But I really feel like I kind of wasted after my sophomore year and after my freshman year. Why didn't I go try that? I was working and doing those things, but I just felt like I had to restart my approach in those years. I remember very distinctly feeling like it was getting things up and going again. So it's for the summer festivals. It's crucial. I think it's crucial on many levels. And one of them is to get a different perspective on how you play the bassoon, or how the bassoon sounds from other students that are at the festival. Or I learned as much from any of these festivals and all of the teachers that were in my educational processes. For some reason, my wife is a flutist. That's not for some reason. For some. I think that is the reason, that I've really been attracted to how flute players produce their sound, the sounds they make. Everything's so resonant, and I'm just jealous of some of their unlabored resonances. And so as I would go through these different, summer festivals or different performance opportunities I was really always focused on the flute and the oboe to a large degree as well, with a lot of strong friends in the oboe, in the oboe world. But I just feel like there's that learning and listening experience in the summer. And I think oftentimes at many universities, getting to a summer orchestra is a step up. And that's really important to see how you react, how you fit into that, to the competition of just getting into the summer festival. And then when you're there, you're listening to see, how do I interact with these people? Am I on par? And then within the orchestra, and getting through that processes of, developing your listening skills and reacting to, why is that flute player sharp in the upper register? Why am I going to do that? How do you find pitch, or how do you react? All those types of important, listening and performance skills. And now, as we all know, it's getting more difficult just to get into festivals, and particularly the ones that are starting to be less expensive. It's like getting into a major university now. So I think I try to get some of my students to really, particularly the performance majors, to really focus their time on, let's get started in September. What's going on with Aspen? What's going on with Eastern? What's going on with all the other festivals that are out there?
So you brought up admissions. You teach at a highly competitive institution, and you have a lot of applicants that you're evaluating. So what makes a student stick out in terms of potential and sparks your interest in working with them when you're deciding admissions decisions?
What I think I mostly listen for is just a sense of, there's a musical soul in there. And that musical soul is either successfully coming through, or I sense through some tension in the body or the embouchure, et cetera, the tensional aspects that seem to be getting in the way. So, but I think, some of the things that are just truisms, that there has to be some technical, I call it fluidity. It's not so cumbersome that we can't play through technical passages with some element of grace and flow. So I think that's very important. And I think sometimes it's easy to, particularly for younger students getting into the undergraduate program at a university, it's hard to have a strong sensibility, a strong practice routine that really does focus on air with scales, and getting it to a fast enough, tempo that you can show that you have the ability to play technically. The other thing in terms of musical gesture is I think sometimes what I spend a lot of time doing with students, because that maybe not all students, but with a lot of students, is listening and looking for tension. And how can the students get rid of that tension? So I'm looking to see how students make vocal connections when they leap to the upper register, or are they moving their embouchure in such a drastic way that I feel like, given I might have a comparison of other students that aren't doing those types of things, that I can choose the students that have already a higher level of using the airstream, using the embouchure in a cushioned, flexible way that is important. And the third thing, if it is, it certainly is intonation. So whether they produce that on their instrument, if there's the typical notes that are sharp or flat, I can hear them making adjustments, or you can hear them not making adjustments. So I often do. So if the student, particularly high school student, is not used to matching pitch or singing, one of the last things I do at an audition is I just go to the piano and start hitting a few notes on the piano, try to figure out where their range is, and I just have, please sing that back to me. And you'd be surprised. A lot of students do that with a wonderful voice and easy to do, and a lot of people still struggle with that. So for me, that's a big warning that oftentimes we will be struggling long term with that. Just the ability to audiate pitch, and it doesn't have to be, it can be a hum if it's not a great opera sound the student is producing, but it has to be, has to be able to get that out of your body in some way. And the other aspect of maybe it's a fourth one is I encourage all students get to a lesson with who you think you want to be studying with for your undergraduate or certainly graduate program. And if I can see that a student really adapts well, is understanding what I'm saying, and it's easy for them to make those adaptations. Short term is one issue, making adaptations. Long term is another, of convincing a student you have to use all that extra energy I'm trying to get these students to use, perhaps, but that they can actually adapt to what I'm trying to get them to do, and most can. So that's when I start to say, well, maybe this person has a really more talent than another person because of how they've been, how I felt they were within the context of the lesson.
Kind of related, you spoke about the competitive aspect of our field, and certainly that is a consideration when seeking and obtaining employment. And you've had a lot of students who are highly successful in the field. And it's a little bit difficult question because, of course, due to the highly competitive nature, not everyone who has phenomenal qualities is ultimately able to quote unquote make it. But I wonder if you have had any observations about, in your teaching, those students who do go on to be highly successful, do you find a common thread or certain aspects in those students? Is that something you've noticed?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, there are some common threads among the successful, I think, students, and foremost, I think, among them is that there is just this, overwhelming desire to not be successful, but to be effective in their improvement as a performer. And I think that's one of the things that I found with students, that I feel like I'm just trying to get out of their way because they've got a really good, they're listening well, they're trying to listen more to sounds and music around them. So I think it's just a real dedication to their craft and to their success. And you can sense it. And so one of the things that I try to do, honestly, is try to get everybody else in the studio, not through comparison, but just get everybody else to the context, getting into the context of, what does dedication look like? And, spending the extra hour a day practicing and or whatever the issues might be. So there's certainly that dedication. And I do think, I keep coming back to tension, but I do think there are some students that are more naturally physical. They understand their body. They understand how their body works. Maybe, if I don't say this in a negative way, but they're not embarrassed about their body. They feel comfortable in their body, and so it becomes a more natural process to engage with it in our very physical approach of our very physical needs on the instrument. So I think that's a really important aspect of the most successful students as well. And I think the third aspect of it is, they look around them and they see colleagues that they want to play with, and they get, I think most of the time I feel like they seek colleagues that will challenge them. as I look back on it, I think that's what I did as a younger student. I saw these, let's go do a quintet together. Okay, I'm not trying to sound like I'm a cutthroat person or, not playing with my friends, but I really looked around and, boy, I really love this guy's oboe playing. So let's get together with that. So get with him. Let's get a trio or a quartet or blah, 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 whatever you want to. But I think there's that element of it too. And I do think some students still it's that issue between you're holding back, you're a little unsure of yourself, or you're just full bore into this process. And so I encourage all of my students to, let go of any guarding process they might have, and make sure everybody realizes we're not competing with each other, but we're competing with ourselves to achieve this success. And that, like the story goes, I don't have my psychology degree quite yet, but I certainly have. But as a private teacher, as you both well know, you feel like you are mentoring these students into positive mental outlooks, positive, healthy mental outlooks. And so sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's, hey, you might, we're off the subject here a little bit, but sometimes, but I do feel like those are the people that really, I feel are really successful in that they really have that dedication. They really have that sense of pouring themselves into the work. They really have the sense of listening to their colleagues and wanting to be associated with those colleagues in any way they can. So
that's a wonderful perspective. I love that. I love the aspect of the importance of the desire to learn all the time, even when you're out being a professional. And that's something that you talked about that you did. Even when you were out teaching and performing, you would say, oh, that's interesting that person does that. I wonder why.
Yeah. So, no, I think that's just crucial. I think if I look back at my career a little bit, I gave up on taking auditions for orchestral positions. I got to the finals for a couple of things, for one, well, maybe just one, but more of them than not, I just didn't even get through the first round. I got there and I was just a terrible auditioner, and I didn't have there's none of that background that we try to give our students today about what does it look like to take an audition. I was just blithering into an audition and I think it goes like this, and I play. There's none of the detailed preparation that our students have the benefits of today. At least that was, and I didn't have the sort of the mentor back then that says, well, Bill, you've only taken 6 auditions. Maybe you ought to be thinking about taking about 20 more before you start thinking that there is that part of the process for students. And I think that as the end result of the students that are successful is that, I've had plenty of doctoral students over the years that in third year, and what's next for me, Mr. Ludwig? Well, and there's tears in the lessons at that point, where you just have to say, well, you just got to pick yourself up. We've got to keep going at this process. But that process does mean for the auditioning of like we we're just saying, the highly successful people, you've got to be really playing at a really high level just to get noticed at this point. It's not, good enough isn't good enough anymore. It's really at an extraordinary level. And I think that's how to embed that in everybody is that, as I've looked over the years of teaching, it's, I've done my best with these students, but now, particularly here at IU, I feel like, holy cow, I'm the teacher I call it teacher of last resort, for some of these students. And I feel like I have to get more and more demanding and more how to demand that within the context of supporting them, but making sure that they realize, yeah, that's pretty good. That's my work for a recital, but that's not going to get you any attention when you're playing with 5 or 6 other bassoon players around the country. So.
Can you tell us more about how you help students prepare for auditions, and if that involves dealing with performance anxiety or even specific audition practicing techniques?
Well, sure. I think that's a lot of what we do. At the undergraduate level, I think students are a little bit unaware of, still even here, sometimes a little bit unaware of what the real career in music is about and how you get there. So I think a lot of it is for me the process of starting the freshman with a knowledge of, okay, here is 30, 40 of our excerpts you've got to have by the time you get out of here as an undergraduate, just so you can get into a good graduate school or make yourself competitive. So I certainly think a lot of it for me is just knowledge of the repertoire that is crucial for students to know. And then obviously, when you get into our core literature, it's a very humbling experience to try to figure out how to do all the details in a kind of, it's almost like 1 + 1 = 2 in the start of the rite of spring. You don't want it pop, you don't want it sharp, you don't want it blah, blah, blah. So it becomes more of a really detailed process to be successful with that. So knowledge of the literature, we do that I've been doing that for quite a while on a undergraduate level, but I've upped that process here quite a bit. And I prioritize it over the 4 years. I say, here's the things we're looking at this year, and I have it by semester, and I can't say we'll get to all of that literature every semester. I'm not going to say that, but we certainly do have that as our goals. And there's another category that is just, this is your daily practice routine of excerpts. And it should be all the ones that are the great eliminators, the Ravel piano concerto, or even the Marriage of Figaro, or maybe just how about beginning our tax on a B flat and a high C, and all those kinds of things that make students realize I have to routine this process. And so for me, that's at the essence of what I think the practicing process is for almost anything, but certainly for the audition process, is we're highly routine in terms of what does the breath sound like, what does it or feel like, and what is the embouchure going to feel like to get this thing started, and what is my process of, what is a lot of people call it performance cues. I use that extensively to try to get students to realize I got to have a concept of the piece, I've got to have a concept of the tempo, and here's how the breath is going to work in that concept, and so it's. But if that can be routine from an early stage, I think it can become a very natural process, and it doesn't have to be, I've got to play well for this audition. No, you're trying to demand that. So I think I've been using that a lot in my teaching over the last, particularly 4 or 5 years, is demanding that from students in lessons. But I tell them you have to demand this of yourself in the practice room, which means a crunch on an attack will eliminate you, but all it takes for most students is, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to be set up and ready to go with my whole process. So, and within the context of just making sure students are aware of their literature and the demands of the tempi that they have to create to give, again, that fluid, assured technique that I'm listening for at the beginning of an audition for, entrance to school. But there is that great unknown of for each. When I say great unknown, it's to be discovered by each student. I feel is the mental aspect of it. So I've had my periods. I didn't do any of that when I was, as I was saying, that's partly when I was such a terrible auditioner. But I've gotten into meditation over the last several years. I've been in situations where I felt like, I just need to calm down. And how are you going to do that? It takes something more than just a good deep breath and you'll be fine, Bill. But no, it takes a way for me. So I do that. I can't say I do it every day now, but I certainly do it several times a week. Sometimes it's related to exercise routines that I do. I feel like I can focus on the little meditation routine I do. So I try to get students involved in that often. To try to get them involved in some sort of, meditative process, or there's so many resources now out there for students, all the Don Green books and all the bulletproof physician, just getting on there once or twice makes you realize, holy cow, there's a whole field here, So getting them involved in that early. And I think a lot of students over the years I've tried that, Mr. Ludwig, it doesn't work for me. And I said, well, you just haven't, you can't read a book and think you've got it. You've got to live it for 6 months before you get to that first audition. And I think that, in essence, is the hard part about a lot of what we do as teachers is, it's not book learning, folks. It's engagement with the breathing process. It's engagement with how you set up an attack. It's engagement with making sure you're not so tight in the whole process that you can't be a success. And so it's not, so the audition isn't a discovery. The audition process should not be a discovery about, well, here's what happens to me when I get nervous, and you've already got to figure that out. So I do think the audition process serves that, there is certainly, you can do all meditation preparation you want to, there's still an aspect of the audition process that is very intense and very at another level of performance awareness that you need to try to find and live in to a certain degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a double read podcast, so we've got to ask about reads. Can you talk to us about your habits, best advice? How do you approach read making?
Well, I've every for the last 15 or so years, in other summers as well, I've been more active performing than I am in the year itself, particularly at IU. It's a few solo recitals and a few guest master classes, and you're in the studio most of the time. But so it's every year, in May, as I try to pretend that I'm a performing bassoonist as I go to Brevard, I start to ask myself, what is the process? What does the reed making process look like for me? And I always change and always try. I think try to get more realistic about that process for myself and for my students. Meaning, do as much culling of poor cane as you can before you get there, before you start making the reed. So there's as little waste as possible of time is my main issue. And as I deal with a lot of different reed styles here. So what I'm trying to get to is I try to make a student define what their reed style is based upon what I think their lip structure looks like to me, their kind of what their instrument is, how much air you always get my students to really engage with the airstream and how much airstream I think they're utilizing, and stick with it. Stick with that reed style for you. I think some students think, well, if I just try to, a Rieger 2, my solutions with my reed frame would be over. No, it wouldn't, darling. We still don't know how to use the knife appropriately. So I try to get the students to stick with the process. And my process is a little bit more, I think, in terms of reed making, is leaving the cane on, leaving a little more cane on. I think I'm a little old-fashioned in that context. I feel like my reed style, I want to be able to have enough cane on the reed so I can dampen and undampen with my embouchure, move a little bit onto the reed, move a little bit back on the reed, and I feel like I can have perhaps a little bigger sound in the tenor register than is probably wanted in some of the American orchestras, or needed to a certain degree, if you understand what I mean. So I'm trying to teach that approach, and then I'm trying to get students to figure out how to lighten that up for themselves through exact numbers in the tip area, making sure the back gets organized, and making sure the back gets organized, meaning you're not trying to get the back that's too heavy, and you've got channels involved in the reed and all those kinds of things. But I found in my teaching here, it's woodworking. It's woodworking, everybody. And it's how to take the cane off exactly the same way, just like you're that Rieger tip profiler. And if you don't want to use a Rieger tip profiler, let's learn what they did with that. So they're using exactly the same angles and counting your strokes, and for me, it's also maybe not taking the rails so far down so quickly. I think oftentimes that really cuts down the vibrations and what I'm looking for in a reed way too quickly. So, I mean, it's a huge subject, but I do feel like in terms of student issues, I do feel like and I think that's a hard thing for students to realize, is that, well, I'm trying to get you to figure out what your embouchure really should look like and be like. And then, oh yeah, that takes more airstream. Okay. And then, you're kind of tight in the back of your throat. So that's really working against. So you're trying to figure that out. And then you're also trying to figure out what your reed style looks like. So it's a growth process on both ways for the first, I think, 2 or 3 years of an undergraduate life, of getting that reed really feeling like it matches the student. And I think, the student has to engage with that process. And so I think that's hard for some people to do that. They want it, well, what's my reed look like? It's an X factor, and it's not an X factor.
They have to go in with a good faith effort in order to get reeds that work.
Yeah, and I think, and some, a lot of, even here, a lot of it is, well, geez, I have to make, that many reads. Yeah. So I'm a terrible enforcer of all my idealistic goals here. I set these goals, but just to realize the actual, I think this is the other major mistake that I made. If I look back and what would you do differently with your career? Well, I think I might make more reads, everybody. So the students just don't realize how much effort it takes. And and with the profiling, with the, and trying to find their processes and understanding that. So just the production of reads, and I think that's and for some people enjoy that. I think I've discovered that some people enjoy the making of a blank more than they like the actual fighting with the actual process of making actually troubleshooting a read.
Right.
The cut and dried versus the complicated and more detailed process is something kids sometimes don't want to deal with.
I love asking this question. I know it's hard to answer, but I'm curious to know, what are some of your favorite pieces to play? And it can be solo, chamber, orchestra, anything.
That was a hard question. For me, it's more about the collaboration with people. It's not so much. I mean, of course, there are pieces I don't really enjoy playing, but there are pieces that I feel like I need to. If I could just find with a great pianist or with the other wind students or wind performers. For me it's an ultimate challenge. I still do enjoy playing Bach suites. I haven't been doing it much here, but I spent a lot of my career playing wind quintets, doing some recordings with the Reicha quintets way gone past. I think a lot of people think this is crazy, but I really love playing in a wind quintet. The intimacy of the chamber music process, as well as just the literature itself, and I really enjoy coaching chamber music and getting particular students involved in that process. And for the orchestral world, I guess I haven't lived in that world all from every week, so I just enjoy being in an orchestra. We're playing Tchaik 4 this summer. We're playing Strauss Zarathustra. We're doing even Marriage of Figaro is up again, and something else is on, Brahms 2. So I've just been enjoying looking through that material and trying to get myself ready for that. So I'm looking forward to those performances.
That sounds wonderful.
Can you talk to us about, it's also a hard question, we're always told, but some of your favorite memories of a past performance?
For me, it's not really related to pieces, but it's the people I've playing with. For me, it's anything that I play with Mark Ostich. He's an oboist. I think many people know who he is. Teaches at Cincinnati. We've been playing together a long time, and we've kept up that correspondence. Kept up our relationship. I just played the Poulenc trio with him for the 10th, 12th time at something at Chautauqua a few weeks ago. And I just enjoy listening to this guy play, and then he's listening to me play, and I taper something, and he says, "Well, that's a good idea. I better taper over here too. Oh, here's your accent quality, and then, well, I better accent like Mark did." So it's just that give and take which I really find so gratifying as a performer. One of the most important, the other thing that sticks out to me, not that I was some leading role in that process, but I did a class over in USC in California a few years ago, and I was in my former student Sean Mauser is in the orchestra there in the orchestra, and so he had me come do a class, and then 2 weeks ahead, "Hey Bill, we need some extras on the concert when you're here. You want to do it?" So I was able to play with the LA Phil with my student on some massively contemporary pieces that needed 17,000 bassoon players. So, but that was just a really a great experience. So for me, it's always about the people.
Absolutely. In closing, I always like to ask, what advice do you have for a young musician who aspires to have a career like yours?
I think a lot of it is kind of what we've been, we've kind of alluded to some of it. I think for me, getting the degrees that you feel like you need. But I think more today now, I think it's also getting training in other aspects of a career, such as in the entrepreneurial aspect of things, fine arts, management processes, just administrative process, so that you can have yourself poised to fit several needs within a academic institution. I think it's getting so much harder now just to get any job in our field, as well as orchestral, as well as academic. So that process, I mean, I do feel like one of the strengths I've had over time was the background of teaching that I've had. And I didn't mention I got kind of burnt out in the 80s. So is this really what I should keep doing? And blah, blah, blah. So I went and hung out with Chris Wiett for a week back in the 80s when he was still at Ohio State. And it was just really just keeping yourself alive to your own growth. So I think that's the only thing my career has really been, is a career for a student is project oriented. What is my next project going to be? Is it going to be a performance project? Am I going to do a little research and write an article about something, so that you become noticed? And I think one of the things that helped me over the years is I just kept playing with different groups and different people, and I think I got some sense of being well known about certain aspects of my playing. So I think making contacts and creating the contacts will help you into any career, but certainly within academia. I think the other aspect of it is, I graduated like a lot of people in my era of, I am going to be the next greatest bassoon player in the Philadelphia Orchestra. But then you started teaching, and after 4 or 5 years, I said, well, this is pretty good too. And so just embracing the teaching process, reading about the actual, educational psychology, just so that you start to broaden and develop your skills as a teacher. And I think that's becoming more and more apparent these days. You read about, or you hear things about, what I wasn't taught in graduate school. Well, we're trying to make sure everybody realizes here in you get out, it's just as valid to teach as it is to play. And oftentimes people that we think are the, have important chamber or solo careers, they have also very important teaching careers to maintain the ability to have a chamber group or to have some semblance of a solo career, particularly within the United States. So I think it all rolls into one. How does a career develop? I think one of the things that really helped me get on the map was I played the Villalobos Brasilieras No. 6 at a flute conference in New Orleans way back ago with the professor at LSU, Catherine Kimmler. And guess who was in the audience? It was Sam Barron, the flutist that was New York Wind Quintet and taught at Stony Brook. He took a liking to my playing. Mr. Weisberg was leaving Stony Brook at that time. And so it was through that chance encounter. It happens to everyone. I'm not the only one, obviously, that happens to. But he said, I really enjoy your playing, and let's talk about maybe you coming up to Stony Brook. So I went up to Stony Brook. I did my thing, played a little bit, taught. And I was offered the job and did that for 5 years, going back and forth between LSU and Stony Brook. But one of the things that I try to be a reflective person about teaching, about my students, about my own playing. But at that time, this is mid 80s. I had 2 kids and I was crazy. But he said the thing that has stuck with me throughout my life. He said, you really get at the moment that the student has the problem. You really get in the moment where the student needs your help. And I didn't know that. So I just felt like that made me, even that was probably 10, 12, 15 years into teaching, made me realize, there are strengths, there are talents, but this is also a very important job that you're doing in getting the student to perform at the highest level that they're capable of. And so I owe a debt to Sam.
Wow, this has been such an inspiring and insightful interview. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us.
It was my pleasure.
So So we hope you enjoyed that interview. Please don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can listen to us anywhere that you get your podcasts. And don't forget to go visit that Double Reed Dish store and pick out the merch. Don't be the only one left out in your section.
We're starting out with domestic orders only. So if you live in the United States, head on over to doublereeddish.com and click the tab store, and you'll be able to find both of our amazing items there.
Galit, who do we have coming up next?
Next time, we are talking with Erin Hill, who is the new assistant professor of oboe at the University of Nevada, Reno.